Tonight, I want to show you how a modern Middle East crisis can ignite without a single soldier crossing a border. Because the most dangerous wars don't always begin with invasions. They begin with pressure, deadlines, pride, and one retaliation that goes a step too far. Right now, the United States and Iran are locked in a high-stakes standoff where every move has two targets. One target is the other country. The other target is each leader's domestic audience. This is not a story about tanks rolling across deserts. This is a story about air power, sanctions, covert action, proxy warfare, and the fragile math of deterrence. And the core question is simple. Who blinks first, and what happens if nobody does? To understand the present, we need the timeline that built it. In 1979, Iran's revolution created a system that defines itself through resistance to American influence. Over the decades, that identity hardened into institutions, security doctrine, and regional strategy. As Iran's influence expanded, neighboring states and global powers started treating Iran less like a normal country and more like a permanent strategic problem. Then the nuclear file became the center of gravity. The nuclear issue is not only about physics and facilities. It is about trust, verification, regime survival, and fear of what the region becomes if Iran reaches the threshold. Every negotiation round becomes a fight over leverage. Every delay becomes a test of resolve. Now fast forward to today. The US message is pressure plus readiness. The Iranian message is defiance plus endurance. And between them sits a region full of players who want stability but also want advantage. Here is what the current standoff looks like in practice. Diplomatically, each side signals firmness to avoid appearing weak. Economically, restrictions and enforcement aim to reduce Iran's revenue and limit its options. Militarily, deployments aim to deter attacks and protect regional bases and partners. And psychologically, both sides are trying to convince the other that escalation will fail. But the real complexity appears when you look beyond the headline actors. Iran's strategy is not only national, it is networked. It uses relationships with armed groups and political movements across the region to create depth and leverage. This creates a battlefield where responses can be indirect and deniable. It also creates a world where a small spark can travel through multiple fronts at once. This is why limited actions don't always stay limited. A strike on one target can produce retaliation somewhere else entirely. A message meant for one capital can be heard as an existential threat in another. And when multiple groups and borders are involved, attribution becomes messy and escalation becomes easier. Now add the regional chessboard. Some states fear Iran's power and want it constrained. Some fear Iran's collapse and want it contained but stable. Some fear war most of all because war disrupts trade, investment, and internal security. And some see opportunity in chaos because chaos can rearrange the balance of power. Then there is the global economy, which turns regional tension into worldwide risk. Because the Middle East is not just geography, it is energy infrastructure, shipping insurance, and global supply chains. And one narrow waterway can become the pressure point for the entire world. When markets sense danger, prices can react before any ship is actually hit. Insurance costs rise, shipping reroutes, futures spike. And governments far away suddenly face domestic anger over fuel and food costs. Inside Iran, the human reality is harsher than the strategy maps. Economic isolation squeezes ordinary families long before it changes elite calculations. Repression and fear shape what people can say, where they can gather, and how they can protest. Political shocks create waves of arrests, shortages, and emigration pressure. And every escalation abroad can tighten control at home. But the humanitarian picture is not one-sided. Fear and loss also exist across the region when rockets fly, drones swarm, and cities prepare for the next strike. Civilians become bargaining chips in battles they never chose. And the longer the standoff lasts, the more normal instability becomes. Now we get to the legal and institutional layer that most people ignore until it suddenly matters. International frameworks can function like hidden tripwires. They create deadlines. They create procedures. They create consequences that are difficult to reverse once triggered, and they can transform a political dispute into a system-wide escalation. This is where technical language can produce real-world shock. A clause, a vote, a mechanism, or a formal notification can change the diplomatic landscape overnight. And because law moves slower than missiles but faster than public understanding, it often catches audiences by surprise. Next comes the media environment, which is its own battlefield. Information is not just reported, it is shaped into narratives that mobilize supporters and intimidate opponents. Some coverage is designed to calm, some is designed to inflame. Some is designed to force leaders into corners where retreat looks like humiliation. And in a crisis, humiliation is gasoline. In this kind of standoff, misinformation is not always the main danger. The main danger is oversimplification. Because oversimplification turns complex trade-offs into moral ultimatums. And moral ultimatums make compromise look like betrayal. So what happens next? There are three broad futures, and none of them are comfortable. The first future is pressure with managed deterrence. Sanctions intensify, diplomatic hostility deepens, military readiness stays high. But both sides avoid direct confrontation and rely on signaling instead of striking. This can last longer than people expect, but it is always one incident away from breaking. The second future is limited strikes with wide ripples. A targeted action hits a facility, a convoy, or a key node. Retaliation follows, possibly through proxies, possibly through direct fire, possibly through cyber disruption. The conflict remains contained on paper, yet the economic and political shock travels globally. This is the scenario where leaders insist they are avoiding war while the region experiences war anyway. The third future is a diplomatic refreeze under deadline pressure. Instead of solving the conflict, both sides attempt to freeze the most dangerous parts of it. The goal becomes buying time rather than building trust. The risk is that a freeze can collapse when domestic politics shifts or when verification disputes explode. Now consider the long-term impacts if this standoff continues. The longer a country sits near the nuclear threshold, the more the region recalculates its own security needs. That can intensify arms racing, covert operations, and preemptive logic. Proxy warfare can become the default language of regional competition, and global energy security remains vulnerable to recurring crises. So what are real pathways forward? First, deterrence has to be credible enough that attacks look costly rather than clever. Second, there must be clear off-ramps so leaders can de-escalate without losing face. Third, any nuclear arrangement must prioritize verification and transparency over slogans and press conferences. Fourth, regional communication channels must exist, even among rivals, because silence turns accidents into disasters. Fifth, humanitarian protections must be real, monitored, and insulated from political revenge. And finally, we need to acknowledge multiple perspectives without pretending all actions are morally equal. From Washington, it's about preventing a nuclear threshold and defending forces and partners. From Tehran, it's about survival under pressure and projecting deterrence. From Gulf capitals, it's about stability, commerce, and fear of spillover. From Israel, it's about preventing existential risk from hardening into permanence. From civilians everywhere, it's about living under decisions they did not vote for and cannot stop. So here is the final truth. This crisis does not require anyone to want a full-scale war. It only requires a chain of moves where each side believes the other will back down. And the most frightening moment in any standoff is the moment both sides decide they can't afford to blink.